Resistance has always been key, especially in America, in the past, and hidden and euphemized to express those who speak the front-line assault for self-determination. I'm specifically talking about African Americans in the 19th and 20th century. Though revolts and struggles happened before these times, and today, I'm starting from a certain checkpoint. This story admittedly does not end with their plight, just caught in the forest fire of power and control, along distinct class lines with the rest of us. But this is not class reductionism at all, but a decompartmentalization of judgment. Anyways, here's some basic civil rights principles and legal scholars. He and Henry Lopez, a legal scholar, once said, "What we look like with racial features in this country is to a large extent the product of legal rules and decisions." End quote. As a foundational concept of caste, this was recognized by Martin Luther King. Having heard of the lowest caste in India called the untouchables, he wanted to visit them out of empathy and sociological research. When Martin Luther King came to a school, the principal introduced King to the class saying, "I would like to introduce you to a fellow untouchable." This did bother King a lot, but he realized the social reality to this statement, what King was unknowingly advocating against in America this whole time. Ian, Henry, and Martin were all pointed out the background energy of the Jim Crow, or what's left of it, in secret ways via disparate impacts. Things that appear non-discriminatory, by the way. Even society throws scraps of respect, but the scraps are still bottles and glass shards, or the symbolic knife as symbolized by Malcolm X. Quote, "You don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches and then pull it out 6 inches and say you're making progress." This is actually what I think of anti-social justice, even if Malcolm X meant a specific intersectional issue. Though this is not about current social justice, when the bodies were being laid out as they are today, social justice is there to call it out. But this new looming problem might go under the unconventional radar or break them apart. But let me start with the chronological order of civil rights and its unfortunate body counts. The main spark of outrage and the force of oppression was the debate over the fates of African Americans to stay in the country via the Back to America movement. With the support of Marcus Garvey, 1887 to 1940, a Jamaican political activist and the strongest voice for black nationalism, leader of the Pan-African movement following the events of World War I. But it's a misplaced empathy, since the African Americans were stripped from their roots, had no idea of the initial origins via partitioned lives from the time and place. Back then, any memory was tortured, frayed, and forced out of them. Africa was legit not their home anymore, for better or worse. As Webb Du Bois, 1868-1963, an African-American sociologist, said African Americans were here to stay. The fight for their freedom with self-determination within the state. There wasn't a moral or pragmatic way to send people anywhere when no direct family, friends, community were not waiting on the other side for them. Even in financial good faith, the Jim Crow era will always be echoed and spoken of in our lore of mass harm and dehumanization. But steps to improve involve minefields beneath the progression of human rights, like slavery into neo-slavery and the concept of convict leasing, or what author Douglas A. Blackman calls slavery by another name. But steps in the United States did happen objectively, and yet you could say it almost in some chronological order of importance, that it happened in chronological order of importance. For it to all come together in structured order. This could be sort of like how people see the periodic table, though this is more memory of what we do and not a necessary foundation for steps to occur. For instance, in the proper foundational step in the civil rights started with Smith versus Allwright, 321, 1940. 1944, April 3rd, the Supreme Court made it unconstitutional to bar black citizens from voting, choosing between necessary evils for freedom, overturning the Texas Democrat systemic bias of only using white primaries, which means this was the main struggle for desegregation, a first step of self-determination, which was finding a voice someone would hear. This ruling obviously downstream to the rest of the country, breaking apart the bigotry, white primary rules elsewhere, as opposed to individual states that hold on to loopholes of discrimination where a person is sent somewhere where it's legal to take away their rights. No, a full sweep of rights in the country. 1944, around the time of the Battle of Normandy to defeat the Nazis, this did not distract people from what was going on in America. A black boy was forced to jump, committing suicide in front of his father over giving a white girl a Christmas card, triggering an essay contest at an Ohio school that asked what to do with Hitler. A 16-year-old African-American girl won the essay with, quote, "Put him in a black skin and let him live the rest of his life in America." Whether or not you think this is overblown hyperbole, at the time it certainly was not. The Nazi Jewish question mirrored the American stamp on African people. Example, as years before, in 1934 and 1936, the Nuremberg Laws for the Protection of Hereditary Health was drafted, and the German Observation of America for German Race Purity stated, quote, "Shoeshine boys in America are exclusively Negroes," and, quote, "The black world metropolis, the neighborhood of Harlem in the northern New York, is populated only by coloreds," and also, quote, "Mongrels among them, mixed marriages between white and black are forbidden in most states of the Union. The former boxer Jack Johnson cannot return to America for marrying a white woman in Paris," end quote. Along with Roland Fleisler, a Nazi jurist who observed the American regime, quote, "Now, as far as the delineation of race goes, it is interesting to look at this list of the American states. 30 of the states of the Union have race legislation, which to him meant race protection. German laws finding the American division among black lines to be remarkable. German lawyers finding the American division remarkable. The Nazi law seeing through the facade that America has distinct racial boundaries, and, quote, even if today the world would perhaps like to pretend it does not. Besides his interest in America and British eugenics asylums, Hitler in the 1920s admired the Western world for, quote, gunning down the millions of Native Americans, keeping a modest remnant under observation in a cage. I assume he's referring to the limited reservations. 1948, May 3rd, via Shelley versus Kramer, a Supreme Court put a limit on certain lower courts not to discriminate on housing, thus could no longer enforce aggressive housing laws. Of course, despite this drop in redline usage, the goalpost of redlining found itself comfortable in 1989 with the modern credit system to determine worthiness, enforcing the generational wealth gap in data form. 1948, July 26, the president of the time, Harry S. Truman, passed the 9981 executive order stating, it is thereby declared by the policy of the president that these shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin, end quote. Or at least catering to non-ambiguous discrimination, but this was a severe step. May 7th, 1954, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, etc., for the most part. The Supreme Court ruled with little resistance that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, toppling the redlining. Legally, maybe not overall attitudes, but support was rising overall in the face of violence. An example being in 1955 when Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black child, was murdered for rumors of casual flirting with a white woman. The murderers got off scot-free. They were very publicly proud of the killings. This was another spark in the civil rights movement as the murders provoked outrage, as expected, hopefully. December 1955, Rosa Parks didn't follow the Jim Crow law by giving up her seat to a white woman, so she was arrested. The fake civility politics was seen through, and a bus boycott took the scene at first. The murder case was reopened in 2004, but the murderers died in 1994, and so prosecutors couldn't continue the investigation.